when they're doing this social media challenge called hashtag Teach Truth, and basically telling people what's something that when you were in school that you wish it was taught to you and you didn't learn about it until later. So I want all of us to say something that you wish that you would have learned in elementary, middle school, high school that you didn't figure out until years later or when you were in college. So I will start here. And I've mentioned this before, but it still blows my mind. One of the things that I wish I would have learned when I was in, even if it should have been elementary, to be honest with you, elementary, middle school, or high school, was that slave owners got reparations.
Mm.
When I found that out, it blew my mind. And no, it it didn't. It happened with our first Republican president, good old Abraham Lincoln. Y'all love Abraham Lincoln so much. He freed the slaves, when he actually really didn't. But on April 16th, 1862, Lincoln signed a bill emancipating enslaved people in DC, right? But to ease the pain of these good slave owners, he also signed the District of Columbia Emancipation Act. And it paid folks up to $300 for every enslaved person freed. That just blew my mind. And then it would continue all throughout the South locally, not on a federal level, but it would continue locally all throughout the South. That is, as an adult, as a teenager, hearing this word reparations. I mean, this is one of the first forms of reparations. And it was given to slaveholders. And you had folks who were against slavery at the time, like William Lloyd Garrison, speaking out saying, this is insane. And that is something that I just think would have been really important for me to know. And I would have had an early understanding of what reparations meant. And I got to add one more thing too, because I live in Jersey. One thing I did not know, you hear about the North ending slavery earlier and whatever. So if a lot of folks don't know, Jersey was very rural, right? And so there was a lot of plantations in Jersey. So instead of ending slavery in Jersey, they had what was called the 1804 Gradual Abolition Act in New Jersey. So what it did is it didn't free anybody. It just said you are an apprentice. You're not a slave, but you're an apprentice. Until you reached a certain age, you would be freed. But that age never really happened. So that was their way. When you had northern states ending slavery, Jersey said no. And the reason why they did it, take a wild guess, is because of money. Because there was a part of Jersey that needed enslaved labor to thrive. So the fact that a northern state, Jersey, has the 1804 gradual abolition, what the hell does that mean? Gradual abolition. That blew my mind. Then by 1846, they would have an act to abolish slavery, but they still kind of kept the apprentice language in there. So those are two things that teach the truth, teach history. I think it would have been important for me to know that, and for my white classmates to know that, and for my Latin classmates to know that, and for my Asian classmates to know that. Unfortunately, I had no Native Americans in my classrooms. You know how that works out. But that would have been really important for me to know. And those are two things that, even when I think about it to this day, it really blows my mind. Ted, what about you? What's something that you think you should have known when you were in high school or middle school or elementary school that you don't find out until you're dishing out a whole bunch of money for college?
Right. Yeah. So in high school, I wish I'd learned more about Reconstruction writ large, but particularly this one example. The Compromise of 1877 was when the parties traded the keys to the White House in order to eliminate civil rights protections for newly freed Black folks in the South. Reconstruction, we know, begins at the end of Civil War. We get the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. That 13th abolishes slavery. 14th Amendment basically says birthright citizenship, and it doesn't matter about your previous status of servitude. So essentially, if you were previously enslaved, you are now a citizen. 15th Amendment says that the right to vote can't be denied based on your color or your race. Okay, so now you have Black folks, Black men entering into the electorate. and changing the politics throughout the South. They're electing folks into Congress as these states are being readmitted from the Confederacy into Congress, and they're changing state assemblies, et cetera. And a lot of white folks that held power in the Deep South weren't happy about it. So then we get to the presidential election of 1876. You've got Republican Rutherford B. Hayes from Ohio running against Democratic governor from New York, Samuel Tilden. Tilden wins the popular vote, the Democrat. Democrat at this time means pro-slavery, or at least pro-segregation. And Republicans are still the party of Lincoln. So Tilden wins the popular vote. He's winning in the Electoral College, but there are 19 votes that are disputed, 2 in the southern states, and I think 1 out somewhere else. And so what the Republican Party says to the Democratic Party, if you let our guy win in the Electoral College, then we promise to roll back federal protection of Black people in the South. The only reason Black folks had any sense of freedom or liberty after the Civil War was because federal troops were living in these Deep South states, forcing the citizens of those states to protect the rights of Black folks that have been granted in those 3 amendments I mentioned. If there's no federal protection, that means those Black folks are now subject to the terrorism that we saw all throughout through the Jim Crow era, and certainly in the Redemption period. And so in order to win the White House, the Republican Party on March 4th, 1877, which used to be the inauguration day before it was January 20th, Rutherford B. Hayes becomes president. So from that point forward, from March 4th, 1877, Reconstruction ends and the seeds are planted. The wheels are in motion for Jim Crow to come in, and all of the racist, the domestic terrorism we saw at the end of the 19th century and into the 20th century begins. Just for the keys to the White House, that's how many of the gains from the Civil War were lost.
Ted, that story, the compromise of 1877, and you basically told it in 1 minute and 30 seconds. See how easy it could be to teach this in a school? The reason why that's so important, and I say this over and over, is when people like to romanticize the Republicans of the mid-1800s, oh, they were the party of civil rights. And I kind of say, relatively. I mean, you know, kind of sort of, like, let's not go too far with it. But the fact that the Republican Party, which the only reason why we win the Civil War is because of Black folks who fought in the Civil War, was because of manpower, right? So Black folks have put their lives on the line. They have fought for this freedom, and the Republican Party sells them out for keys to the White House. So really, you only had a Republican Party allegedly supporting Black folks for about 10 years or so, 10 or 11 years, and they sell them out. That's why I say, don't come with me with that party of Lincoln bullshit. Don't with that Ulysses S. Grant bullshit and the way he treated Native Americans. But don't come with me with all that bullshit, because at the end of the day, they were all, and if you want to say loyal, okay, you're right. They have federal troops in the South. But then those Democrats said, what was the language? We'll leave the Negro problem to the South. The Negro problem. They sold us out. And Frederick Douglass said that Abraham Lincoln, although he was assassinated by this time, he was a white man's president. He was a white man's president. So I get so angry when I hear them try to romanticize the only reason that Lincoln was forced into glory. And I think he would have been totally happy with that 1877 compromise. So that's really, really important. And it's so easy to teach. And it goes to show this is why so many of us can be so disenchanted with our politics, because it's in the blood. It's in the blood. It is in the blood. And I don't care if it was a third party, whatever it was, those rich white folks at the time had no issue selling us all the way out. So thank you for that. Look it up, y'all. Compromise of 1877, real shady. The Republicans wanted the keys to that White House. They said, forget the Negro problem. So yeah, thank you, brother. What about you, Reese? What's something that you wish you would have learned when you were in school that you don't learn until you are a grown woman?
Well, let me tell you something. My school didn't teach me shit about Black history. So there is a whole lot that I had to learn later. And I certainly cannot sound like a historian like Ted did, or the great Dr. Carr that I'm privileged enough to sit beside every week on Roland. And then he's on Karen Hunter's show. They have so
in class.
Go see them for the history lesson. I ain't your girl for that. But I mean, I will say, just generally, the thing that I really enjoy learning more about, like I said, I can't recite it to y'all in a sophisticated way, is about Black political power. I mean, right after Reconstruction, there were more Black people in those elected positions. Obviously, they were all men. And throughout the history, I mean, we've had soft political power as well as tangible political power in terms of being appointed to different executive positions, secretaries of different departments, and being elected to Congress. You know, you had Edward Brooks, who was a Republican in Massachusetts, who was actually really instrumental in fighting segregation and being in big desegregation efforts and things like that. And so there's we have a very rich history of Black political power. Even if you look at the CBC, there's so many things that they don't get credit for because maybe they didn't necessarily achieve their objectives, like for instance, Medicare for all or whatever else. But they have been fighting for decades for a lot of these things that aren't attributed to them. And so I think one thing that I'm always interested in learning more about, and I wish more people really understood, is the kinds of efforts that we've made with our political power and how much progress we've made and how much of the things that we have accomplished are due to the hard work of Black people, whether they get credit for it or not. So that's what I have to contribute. And when I am sophisticated enough to talk about it, you'll see it in the book or you'll see it on a media tour.
You know what? I want your book to be called Reese Colbert, I Can Be Disrespectful. You know, I said that should be the title of your book. You know, just to add to that, though, when I think about, you're right, that we don't really, for some reason, we only think about Black political power or the power of Black voters with Lyndon B. Johnson, with him signing the 1964 Civil Rights Act. But let me remind you, the reason why FDR gets elected is because of Black voters. Although FDR was a stone cold racist, but because of the New Deal, Black folks saw that their lives improving. Although he didn't want Black folks to benefit in any way from the New Deal, but he had no choice. So FDR gets reelected only because of Black voters. He had massive Black voter turnout, and even with that said, when Jesse Owens goes and becomes a gold medalist at the Olympics in Germany, where Hitler is there, FDR does not allow Jesse Owens to come to the White House. Ain't that something? Ain't that something? Ain't that something? He went to freaking the Olympics. Hitler is there. Hitler. And Black folks got you in office, FDR, and you still said you can't come to the White House. It's just fascinating. It's just that kind of history that we just, again, look, that took us all but 10 minutes.
Right. And those Black folks that put FDR in, they were running away from the terrorism in the South. This is the Great Migration folks moving into New York, Massachusetts, Illinois, these places, and were places where Black people could vote. So by us escaping terrorism, we turned ourselves into voters. And then we voted for basically recovery from the Great Depression. And it was the states, like state officials in New York and these other places, that allowed Black folks more participation. And then FDR gets the benefit from it, even though he wasn't the one. That wasn't his intent. It was to wasn't to sort of enfranchise Black folks throughout the country, but he benefited from it when we sought it on ourselves. To Reese's point, we turned ourselves into a political power by relocating to places where we could participate in democracy and the economy.
Which still is effective now because we have this insidious electoral college, but because of this migration, we are a powerful voting bloc in Pennsylvania because of Philly, in Michigan because of Detroit.